So we're going to be providing this workshop and be recorded. It will be up on our website as well as our YouTube channel. So if you're not able to get through the whole workshop today, you can go back and listen to the recording. We are definitely excited to interact live with you today. So thanks for joining. You can go to the next slide. So Sasha mentioned, please rename yourself and you can introduce yourself in the chat like Sasha mentioned. Definitely use the chat. We are monitoring it. If you have a comment, if you're excited about something, use the reaction buttons. You can also change your view if you need to and if you'd like to see all of us. Slide. So just to get us started, our agenda, I'm going to do a quick welcome. We'll talk about the project, sort of what our setup is for this hybrid initiative, and then go into a little bit of a context about hybrid meetings, what we've been hearing from municipalities, talk a little bit of about some snapshots of what of our key partners in this project are doing and how they're growing and what questions we continue to have. And then we'll have time for peer-to-peer learning and breakouts. Next slide. So just welcome to our partners. If you all can wave, Leon Goodwin, Sarah McDonald, Amanda Smith, Michelle Tyler, and Ala Abusala. We're so excited to hear from your experiences here in Massachusetts and what your towns and cities are doing and our shared understanding and learning together. Please feel free to reach out to them directly throughout this time together or after the presentation. Next slide. This is our team here. We can all wave. We provide technical assistance to 101 municipalities in Metro Boston, and happy to support with the work that you all are doing in hybrid meetings. But we're, continuing this initiative as key partners. And working with you all on all different types of community engagement topics, not just hybrid engagement, interpretation, translation, meeting design, and training. So excited to connect with you all today and happy to support in any way we can. Slide. So just some quick group agreements. So this is just how we want to be in the space together. We definitely want to encourage you all, if you can, to keep your videos on, use I statements when you're sharing your own experiences, just because your experiences might be different than others. Take space, make space. So if you don't tend to speak up a lot, taking up space in the room and sharing your experiences or making space for others. If you're noticing other people may not be sharing as much or you want to open up the space for them, feel free to do so. We ask folks to use accessible language, so try to avoid acronyms. Not all of us have the same function or role or do the same things every day and are coming from very different, potentially very different fields. So try to avoid acronyms and using accessible language. Lean into your edges, so try to push yourself into different ideas, expand the way we think about things, deconstruct and reconstruct the way we think about engagement, so you can come up with creative solutions. And then accept and expect lack of closure. We're still all figuring this out. Hybrid engagement is still a question mark for many folks. And so know that you may come to some conclusions, but there are going to be some unanswered questions. Think about listening for active listen for understanding, and make sure that you are actively participating. So especially in the breakouts, we do encourage you to keep your video on. Next slide. So this is our hybrid initiative. It's going from June to the end of the year. We have a project kickoff. We've been meeting with our municipal partners. And then, like I said, we have 4 workshops that are going through the end of the year. Just one thing I want to highlight here, we do want to have some focus groups. Our partners and municipal teams identified at least 3 that we want to do. So working to think about how to engage IT specialists, cable access TV, and then any school in K through 12 teachers or universities that have been already doing hybrid engagement. So if that is you, would love to hear from you and connect on those pieces. So I'm just going to pause here because I think Emily's going to launch a poll for us around who is in the room. So I'd love to hear who is here with us, 144 folks. And so Emily, handing it off to you.
Wonderful, thank you, Carolina. So you should see the poll in your screens. Give me a heads up or thumbs up if you can see it. It says number 1, which of these roles best describes you? Please, pick whatever is the best sort of choice. Municipal staff, IT staff, municipal legal counsel, local cable access staff, elected official or other. And then 2, have you held a hybrid meeting? And that would be a meeting that is simultaneously in person and virtual, yes, no. So I'll give you a couple more seconds to finish that, as I see that about 77% of you have filled it out. So a couple more seconds so that we can showcase the answers on the screen. All right, I'll give you 5 seconds. Great, thank you everyone for your participation. And I'm going to show the results. So I'm going to end the poll. All right, so you should be able to see which of these roles best describes you. Mostly we have municipal staff. We have secondly, other. So kind of curious who the other are. If you have not introduced yourself, please do so in the chat. Next, we have local cable access staff and elected officials. And then we have IT staff. No legal counsels are in the room. So hopefully we won't get into too much trouble today. Thank you.
Awesome, Emily, thank you so much. So the last thing I'll point out before going to the next slide is at the end of this process, we're hoping to have some type of online hybrid engagement toolkit where you all can access the information we've collected throughout this time, the feedback you're giving and sharing in these workshops, as well as some of the focus group findings. So be on the lookout for that. Next slide. So just a reminder to us, what is a hybrid meeting? I think a lot of people have different definitions. So to us at MAPC, we're thinking about a place where attendees can participate live, fully remotely, or in person. And a facilitation is happening in person and virtual. And that could be the same person, 2 different people. And there are many ways we can think about this. I know staffing has been a big concern that folks want to get into. And then it happens during one date or time. And there's 2-way communication. So back and forth communication between others in a space. I'm curious to hear if there's a different definition of hybrid that people have. So if you do have something like that, feel free to put it in the chat. And then next slide, we'll just want to highlight some of the things that we won't be focusing on. So we won't be looking at multi-layered engagement, which means, thinking about different engagement activities at different times and layering on top of each other. So for example, an online open house and then doing a survey and then a virtual focus group. So really think about something that's happening simultaneously, not focusing on recorded meetings and posted meetings or one-way communication. The last thing, if we go to the next slide, is I just want to acknowledge the ever-changing COVID-19 situation. I know all of you have been working really hard and diligently on doing the best we can to continue to engage our communities while also maintaining safety as a priority. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that. It's a really tense time, and thank you for making the time to be here. Some of the things that have been highlighted from others has been, considering in-person meeting policies such as contact tracing, mask requirements, proof of vaccination, and space management. And then thinking about different plans. So plan A, plan B, plan C, and making sure you have flexibility and, potential return to remote or virtual. The other thing that folks have been talking about is sort of staffing flexibility as well during this time. And, if you are doing in person or virtual, thinking about how you can make staff, presence and engagement flexible as well. So just if folks wanted to put in the chat, last ask is just thinking about any, challenge that you feel that you have about hybrid meetings that you want to share with everybody. So what's your biggest concern? Awesome. Thanks so much, Emily, for putting that in the chat. What's your biggest concern around hybrid engagement? So I'll give everybody a few minutes to put that in the chat. And while you're doing that, we can move over to the next slide. So, you know, we've all sort of experienced this either anecdotally. I have seen some data out there as well, but thinking about pros of virtual engagement and pros of in person. So, you know, in terms of virtual, thinking about the shift of power dynamics, the accessibility that this has brought to us in terms of, you know, for example, allowing parents with children to attend public meetings that may have really busy schedules, people with disabilities, those that have transportation barriers, or people with non-traditional working hours. And then, you know, in person, there has been kind of a reflection around, you know, this inherent human connection that we have when we are able to be in person, unstructured networking time that happens either before or after a meeting, sometimes during, and then opportunities for analog participation, right? Getting to look at maps, you know, be able to actually be in a space with people and brainstorm together. Go to the next slide. So, you know, what does it mean to have, you know, hybrid? You know, some folks have noted that there's flexibility there, you can provide options to people. And then, you know, we just are finishing up our 30-year plan for Metro Boston, and so the need for having a dynamic government is really something that's been highlighted there. So, you know, getting us to the 21st century and building out our resiliency. Some of the potential opportunities for hybrid. So wanted to see if there are other things that people are seeing here as needs. And then we'll go to the last slide here. Some of the other places, and I'm sure maybe we can highlight some things in the chat. Maybe Emily, if you see some things you want to highlight, but challenges and unanswered questions, you know, budget, always coming back to that, technology, capacity, how many people it takes to manage, policies around open meeting law, COVID-19, and public discourse, and then the quality. So hoping we can get into that a little bit today. So I'm going to pause here and see if there's anything my team wanted to highlight before I move it over to Framingham to talk a little bit about their thoughts.
I'm just kind of doing a quick look at the challenges in the chat, and it looks like these bullets cover a lot of what was said. There's also some pieces around equity, around translation, interpretation. So I'll continue to look at it, but there's definitely a lot of challenges. Thank you for your input.
Awesome. So I'll hand it over to Ala.
Thanks, Carolina. Hi, everyone. So my name is Ala Basala, and I'm the Citizen Participation Officer for the City of Framingham. I work very closely with the 30+ boards and commissions that are appointed by the mayor. One of the biggest challenges that we saw was right when we went completely remote, we didn't have the systems in place where people can request virtual meetings or Zoom accounts and all the technology and pieces that make the process easy. And not just for like staff to manage, but also for board members to facilitate and to organize. So one of the great things that we did was right away was hire a Zoom administrator using CARES Act funds, and having one dedicated person that provides the coordination and logistical support made things a lot more easier and streamlined. So board members had the training that they needed, and they had the technological support right away. We haven't had many hybrid meetings. The only ones that we've now are going back into doing both is the city council. And that goes back to like having, you know, 2 dedicated staff persons. They have, you know, their own administrative assistants, and then also the Zoom administrator to kind of, you know, manage these as 2 different kind of meetings in a way. So one of the great things that has come out of the challenges that we have been seeing is our ability to assess what we have and what we don't have, and what gaps and what needs we need to be evaluating and updating to catch up, because there's definitely no going back from, just in person or just virtual. We have to be able to sustain what we've already kind of created and also grow with society's evolving changes. And I think that's pretty much it. Kind of, it's more for Framingham of we're learning as we go, and excited to work with our partners and learn together along the way.
Thank you so much, Ala. Passing it over to Michelle from Randolph.
Thank you, Carolina. Michelle Tyler. I'm the Director of Planning for the Town of Randolph, which operates a city form of government. In Randolph, most of the regulatory boards and commissions have met only remotely since the initiation of the pandemic. However, the planning board has been operating on a hybrid fashion for a year and a half now. So we're the guinea pigs for every problem that can go wrong. We've experienced it. And I actually chuckle kind of reading through the chat on the replies to the question of what are your concerns, because I'm checking them off and saying, yep, been there, yep, I understand that completely. The bad news is that I don't have answers for resolving some of them. The planning board, I'm going to tap into something that Ala said. One of the biggest challenges has been technology, and that's not limited to technology in the building of Town Hall, but for members and participants. And not everyone has Wi-Fi. Not everyone has a tablet or even a smartphone. And so finding solutions for the general public to participate, but also for board members, voting board members, to have access to technology for participation. There were some notes previously from folks in chat about how hard it is really to maybe look at a set of plans on a small screen, especially if you shrink that down and you're on a smartphone. Really, an in-person access to that has made a difference. However, we are managing and learning as we go along, and my notes on the challenges again echo what folks have seen. The staff support required for an efficient meeting and a productive meeting, and a backup plan because equipment fails. It does. You've all experienced it, I'm sure, on your ends. And for end users who may not have experience with whatever platform you're using, is for them to have knowledge and awareness of how they can participate in the public process effectively so that their voices are heard. And that's what I'm offering from Randolph.
Thanks so much, Michelle. And last but not least, passing it off to our Dedham team.
Thank you. So I'm Leon Goodwin. I'm the town manager at Dedham. Dedham, we have a population of about 25,000. We have a select board, town manager, representative town meeting form of government. Like I think most everyone here, we went fully remote back in March of 2020. And that was a bit of a shock to the system for Dedham, because prior to that, we had no infrastructure in place for that kind of work. Our employees, we actually had a sort of a prohibition against remote work at the municipal level. So going from prohibiting it to encouraging it and in fact requiring it was a leap technologically, and also just a mental shift. And then bringing all the meetings virtual was a learning exercise. We switched technology after about a couple months. We started off with Blue Jeans, and then we realized everyone was going to Zoom. So we switched over to Zoom, and that was, I think, made it a little bit easier to consolidate all of the boards and committees around one platform, because that was a challenge. People were all sort of just scrambling to use what they wanted. And kind of like Olive said, creating a system by which people could request licenses, set up meetings, and all of that was a process, and then something that had to be done to make it work more effectively. I think the good thing about going virtual, and then why we've chosen to pursue hybrid is that we saw much higher levels of participation. Dedham had previously explored, at least sort of conceptually, ways of allowing better access to our meetings, and that was, perhaps having childcare at meetings at nighttime or things like that. And we never actually got that off the ground because there were logistical problems and legal problems and everything like that. Well, the great thing about a virtual or a hybrid meeting is we saw participation from lots of people who either can't make it to meetings because they have family commitments or work commitments, or we had doctors zooming into meetings wearing their gowns and masks to talk about the pandemic in the early part, and that never would have happened if we were only in person. So I think virtual opens up the opportunity for folks to contribute to their town and to the conversation in ways that aren't possible if you're only doing one or the other, or only doing in person rather. So hybrid is definitely a benefit in that regard, and it allowed us to work throughout the pandemic. I think the challenge is, Dedham, like most towns, we have a limited IT budget, we have a limited IT staff, and getting it off the ground was a challenge. Our town hall still isn't outfitted really, I think, ideally for a hybrid meeting. We went remote, and then we tried to go hybrid using like easy to use, accessible, sort of off the shelf hardware. So we bought the Meeting Owl Pros, and those are, they're basically plug and play. And they get the job done, but the audio quality is not perfect, and the camera reaction is not perfect. So we're actually working with our local access TV and a couple of vendors to get quotes to figure out a way of setting up a more robust permanent system that we can use into the future. But again, that's going to be a costly exercise that we need to plan for. So I guess I'll leave it at that. But I think that the benefits far outweigh the cons, and I think that's why the town of Dedham is so interested in this, is that it really is an opportunity to engage with a lot more folks in the community.
Great, Leon, thank you so much for sharing. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over. We've heard a lot of feedback in the chat and lots of questions, so I'm excited to dive in. I'm going to pass it over to Christian Brandt, our planner and community engagement specialist, to lead our Q&A. And then we will go into our breakout. So I think we could stop sharing. Thanks so much, Christian.
Awesome. All right, everybody. So there's been truly a lot shared in the chat. So I'm going to try my best to get to some of the most frequently discussed issues. So the first question that came up a lot of people mentioned it, was how do you ensure access to information or access to an experience that's relatively even across in-person and virtual participation? So I believe one of our panelists referenced this when they were talking about planning documents being shared over Zoom. So if any of you would be willing to speak a little bit to how you've managed that, that would be great.
Yes, that was me, Christian.
Awesome.
Access to documents remains a challenge. It is and that's depending on the end user and the type of technology that you're using. So we do require an applicant or whomever is making a presentation to provide the documents on a digital format to municipal staff. And we're doing the screen sharing to make sure that we can manage that and provide it in a fashion that's a lot easier than someone who may not have some tech savvy. When we first started doing hybrid, I actually had somebody put a set of plans on an easel and then try to zoom their camera into it, which is impossible. So that was a lesson learned, like now that one's never happening again. But also access and participation. For instance, we don't use the chat function in the regulatory meetings because then folks are asking questions that the rest of the folks may not see or hear about, and maybe outside of a public comments process. So we actually kind of established a process format for regulatory meetings, whether they're hybrid or remote, to manage that piece of it. And again, the screen sharing is done by municipal staff so that we don't have snafus or someone inadvertently sharing something that's on their computer at home that maybe they didn't want folks to see.
Exactly. Thanks so much, Michelle.
One other thing I would add is just constant iteration. We need to ask people their experience and whether it worked or it didn't and what they felt during that time. And then I think the other piece is making sure we share that with our colleagues. You know, I know we're all working on so many projects and doing so many different things, but I think making sure we communicate back to our teams and to each other is going to be really important as we figure this out.
One thing that I'll just also add on to the end of that comment is that in terms of sharing documents, we recently facilitated a public forum for a corridor traffic study. And as you can imagine, that had a lot of technical drawings and concepts provided by the Central Transportation Planning staff. And so because it was all virtual, we showed them on the screen, but we also provided those documents in advance on the project website in a downloadable form that also had a link so that we could share the link in the chat. So that way, even if people hadn't visited the website, they could still access on their devices. That obviously doesn't get around the any issues with regard to the digital divide, but it did help some people in the meeting be able to open it on their device and sort of zoom in and follow along. So our next question is related, and a lot of folks in the Q&A mentioned that they were curious about how to manage multiple sources of comments and making sure not to favor people who are in person over people who are on Zoom, or favoring people on Zoom who are in person, and seeking a way to give everybody equal access. So if any of you have any insights about that question, please feel free to chime in.
I'll chime in only that the hybrid meetings that we've been holding, the in-person participation has only been from board members, not from the general public. The general public is limited, I will use the term limited, only to accessing the meeting through a virtual format. Therefore, I won't, and I do not have those challenges of a member in person wanting to speak versus only virtual. But someone else may, Dedham, you probably have some of that experience.
Yeah, I think
please.
I can jump in a little bit, and then feel free, Sarah, Amanda, if you have thoughts on this too. So I guess from my experience, it's far easier to inadvertently ignore the Zoom folks because, especially because we use the webinar format, so people may have the hand up in the attendee list. Whereas it's really hard to ignore someone who's physically sitting in front of you like 10 feet away, and if they're waving their arms or they can just talk. So I think that you have to be really cognizant of that. Whereas when we started out going completely virtual, I, as town manager, ran the technology and hosted the meeting and made sure, and that it worked okay. It was cumbersome, and I thankfully have a very forgiving select board that not everything went perfectly smoothly, but it was the best we could do. And then sort of, I think, partway through all of that, we brought Amanda on board, which has really helped because we have someone else to help facilitate meetings. And then now that we're doing the hybrids, it's absolutely imperative that we have an additional person there to run the computer, because I have other duties as town manager, whether it's delivering my report or helping manage just the flow of the meeting, that I can't be looking at the computer, making sure that we recognize everyone has hands up, and then making sure that the audience is all taken care of as well. So it does require more staffing to make sure you're providing equitable access and participation, but I think that's sort of the price to pay for that option.
Absolutely.
Christian, if I could just add,
Yeah, please.
I, as an elected member on a board, I think about the meetings almost as choreography, right? Whether, even when they were in person, you had to sort of know who was coming and going, where you would look to acknowledge someone. And I think that it's the same framework in thinking about hybrid, in that now the script, right? Or the run of show, so to speak, of the meeting includes look at the Zoom participants before you wrap up any conversation. And so I think continuing to really practice our preparation for meetings so that both are always on the table will help. I mean, the flip side is we've always shown our in-person meetings on our local access cable, but no one can participate, right? So even if you do Zoom not great, you're doing it better than a one-way streaming of a meeting, in that there is an opportunity for people to connect more directly. So.
Thanks, Sarah. Ala, do you have any thoughts on this particular question?
I just wanted to add one thing that I've observed here in Framingham is that lots of times our board members will let the chair know when somebody is in Zoom and they've missed them, because right now the board is kind of split. We have some people coming in person, and then a lot of them like don't feel comfortable yet and they want to stay on Zoom. So that's been helpful in reminding the chair.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to move us on to our next question, and this feels like sort of a to be or not to be type of question for our meeting today. But have any of you decided between hosting a hybrid meeting or splitting the meeting into two, where one is just an in-person meeting and one is virtual? And if you've made that decision, what kinds of things did you take into consideration that pushed you in one way or the other? I see. I'm wondering if anyone from Dedham has any thoughts on this one.
So I can't speak directly to this, but I do know that, like, for example, we have a planning committee working on reuse of our current police station, which is which will be soon our former police station. And they've been doing a lot of community engagement, and they've hosted a variety of meetings, and some of them have been virtual only, some of them have been in person only, and I think they're being very deliberate about that, and knowing that they're engaging with different pockets of the population, and that they need to cater to that. So I guess that there are certain pluses to making that decision to be, okay, we're going to hold a virtual meeting, and we will. I think you need to provide the information equitably, but you also need to make sure that you're providing that access, because there are certain folks who will never show up at that virtual meeting, and there are other folks who will never show up at that in-person meeting. So holding both, I guess, is a benefit, and especially where it's difficult to hold a hybrid meeting of that sort.
Absolutely. Michelle or Ala, do you have any insights on this?
So for our mayor, she hosts different community hours once a week. We've been kind of transitioning back to in person, and kind of just trying to see, based off of the conditions and COVID and the cases and all of that. I think it's too fluid. It's too fluid to kind of just like say we're just going to be doing it in person or hybrid, or so. Right now, the mostly hybrid meetings, and the only actually are the council meetings.
Great.
Most of the meetings running here are regulatory meetings with votes, so there would not be an opportunity to have two meetings split. However, there are community meetings where that could happen. I'm not aware that we've done any like that. They've either been all in person or remote. And again, the hybrid piece has really not been for the general public. It's our board or committee members that are functioning in a hybrid fashion. So we don't have significant experience with that, but I do believe we've got some fall committee meetings, community meetings coming up where that might be an opportunity for that.
Thank you, everybody. I think we are at the end of our Q&A time, so I'm going to hand this back to Carolina. But I do know that there were lots more comments in the chat than we were able to get to today. So hopefully we'll be able to discuss those in our breakouts. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Christian. And I think one thing to think about, one of the points that Michelle brought up, either commissions or boards, what does that hybrid meeting look like? And that's seemingly coming together a little bit more for people. Whereas when we think about the larger events or larger public engagement opportunities, that might still be a question. And I guess the question I have for you all is, where does that intersect, and how can we be deliberate about bringing in the public in a virtual and in-person way? Because I think there are a lot of creative ways to do it, but we really need to think about that deliberate action and highlighting people in the virtual realm in person and vice versa. So I'll leave you all with that. I'm going to pass it over to Emily to talk about our breakout rooms and how we're going to split up and get us going to more conversation with our peers.
Great, thank you so much. So we definitely wanted a moment to have all of you talk to each other as well. And so we have some questions for you. Generally, what's been working well, what hasn't been working, why. Talking a little bit about what Sarah was talking about, which is how's that facilitation going, like that meeting design, what is the choreography that's happening that's useful. Maybe policy questions, if you have any that you wanted to bring up. I think someone had some questions around like who even decides whether something is virtual or not, or hybrid or not. And then there were some questions too around quorum, which that challenge. And then technology. I think a lot of you brought up a lot of great specific questions around wanting to know, what are people using? What is working? What's not working? And so we want to have a chance for you all to share that with each other. We are taking notes. We'll definitely, share all of this out. And again, we're going to be getting deeper into all of these discussions in the next workshops in September and October and November, but today's sort of that first start.
Great. So yes, apologies if folks did get caught up in your session. If you'd like to continue your thoughts via the chat, we highly encourage that. We will be, taking a look at the chat after, and hopefully, sharing out any key ideas from this webinar with you all. So any information you'd like to share, please feel free to add it to the chat. For the next 10 minutes or so, we're just going to do a report back from each group. So I'm going to call on each of our partners to just share a little bit about what some key themes were in each group conversation. And we'll start with Michelle.
Thank you, Sasha. Some interesting discussion. I actually learned some new things today. So thank you to group one. Things that worked well were actually the fact that we can increase engagement by the general public in participating in meetings, whether they're regulatory meetings or community meetings. A number of communities had some great support from cable access, which kind of tapped into the whole technology and staffing support to make meetings work well. There was some interesting discussion about a watch party. I really like that from NEAT, that there's instead of having a hybrid meeting in that community included kind of a big screen TV where public could come in and watch the meeting. So in case they did not have access at their own homes or places of business. And there was a computer set up where they could still participate in the meeting hosted on Zoom by accessing the one laptop that was in the room, and there was a facilitator. So there was some creative solutions there. What hasn't worked in many cases is related to technology, whether it's been audio issues or video, or even technology for board members, board committee and commission members, of what access they do have to physical technology, or even their skill set in using technology, especially as it's adapted so significantly in the past year, a year and a half ago. I think I knew one person who heard the word Zoom and didn't think that it meant a 1970s TV show. Meeting design and facilitation, there was lots of discussion about staff support and the need to have support managing meetings. If you're a participant, you can't really be paying attention to the chat function or the waiting room, etc. There was also some great comments about the fact that hybrid meetings require additional discussion and explanation so that members participating both remotely and in person really can operate on the same wavelength with the same information. So there is this very specific discussion provided in order to ensure that full participation. Regarding policy, most of the discussion was around seeing members, who's in the room, how do you host a meeting? Is it a meeting if it's on the Zoom platform versus a webinar? Can you see all of the participants or only some? Are some of the participants driving while you're having the meeting? Are they using a static photo so you're not really sure that they're there while they're participating in the meeting? And also kind of that interaction of, you know, what I might say if my boss wasn't sitting here on this workshop. I might say something different, but I can see him in the room. So how those were some of the challenges and discussions around policy and what the group might like to see come out, and adding consistency and conformity to platforms. That kind of also related to open meeting law, whether members had to register in advance, and how do you ensure a quorum? Is the quorum the virtual piece? Is the quorum the in-person piece? Is it both? How do you manage that? And technology, we kind of got cut off there, but Brian Howard was talking about using CARES Act funds and ARPA funds for acquiring the technology that you need for hybrid meetings through those funding sources.
Thank you, Michelle, and I'll pass it to Leon.
Thank you, Michelle. And I know that Carolina wanted me to have the best report out, but I think Michelle is going to steal that. I think you really echoed a lot of what we talked about. I think that there's a huge value. What works well, there's a huge value in partnering with cable, your local access television. They seem to have, there's a skill set there, there's a familiarity there. And I think, like what we've already talked about, a lot of boards and committees were already doing sort of one-way broadcasting, and hybrid is just the next evolution of that. So I think relying on those folks who can help you out is important, rather than trying to do it all on your own. I think what works well also, having someone who's a facilitator, and I think the exact quote is, that if you keep doing it, each meeting is slightly less horrific. So keep practicing at it, and it gets better, and it is, it's not going to be perfect, and it might be a little messy, but it's worthwhile to keep on trying at it, because I think the end product will be good. We talked a lot about the format, meeting versus webinar. We found that for regulatory boards, the webinar works well because it helps sort of control the flow of the meeting. It maintains that decorum that you expect to have in a regulatory type of meeting. Moving into policy, I think the best thing that we talked about there was, first of all, having a standard policy and figuring out ways of making sure the whole organization is doing things similarly. One of our cable TV partners mentioned that they have a reservation system where people can request the technology and support that they need for the meetings. And I think that that's a great idea, and something that we should probably steal, because that is a struggle here in Dedham, even months later, is that there's still a lot of confusion about what is available, how to do the hybrid meeting, and who actually has to help facilitate that. So, and then, yeah, I think, again, I don't want to repeat a lot of what Michelle said, but it was a great conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Leon, and I will pass it to Ala.
So Leon and Michelle touched on a lot of the things that we talked about. Most of our members have experience facilitating or participating in hybrid meetings, but for internal meetings rather than public audiences and community events. Some of the concerns that were raised were when these new meetings take place, what do we do to make both parties feel engaged and want to continue participating? We talked about having clearly defined staff roles in terms of managing these two different meetings and things like checklists to help coordinate. We talked about accessibility and translations and support for hearing impaired. Changes in Zoom. Apparently there's a lot of updates and changes that are happening in Zoom, and keeping up with them is a part-time job in a way. And we talked about a lot of the partnerships with the government channels and the local access TVs. One concern that came up was moving forward and the costs affiliated with continuing to broadcast a lot of these meetings, especially for different boards and commissions that are not as not as big as the Board of Selectmen or City Council. And we also talked about technology, and one thing that I really stuck out to me was from Newton, where they talked about having engagement tools, not just platforms to actually host the meetings, but similar to Jamboards, where you're actually engaging with people, and it's not just you're presenting something, where you're having them contribute to something that's going to be creating like a collage, kind of like sticky notes. And we talked about using schools and teachers and to look at those as examples. And yeah, I don't know if I missed anything else from group 3, if anyone wants to jump in.
Thanks, Ala. I think if folks want to add, we welcome you to do so via the chat, and I'm going to pass it over to Christian for our last group share out.
And thanks, Sasha. So a lot of what we talked about, it sounds like everyone else talked about too. So I'll spare all of you the repeat, but a few things that we discussed that haven't been brought up yet were using Zoom rooms as a way to facilitate hybrid meetings in a better way. And then also at the very, very, very end, my colleague Courtney mentioned working with local communications courses or with a AV class in the high school or media studies class in the high school to coordinate some volunteers for departments that might not have the type of resources to hire full-time staff, and potentially you could also do this in exchange for course credit. Or I know some high schools require community service hours to graduate. So reaching out to form that partnership could be a way to get that extra support that you need to run your meetings virtually.
Thanks, Christian. And I will pass it over to Yolanda to close us out.
Great. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Very much appreciate you all taking part in sharing your insights. I definitely got a lot out of today. I believe that this idea that Neil deGrasse Tyson shared, where cross-pollination is fundamental to truly revolutionary changes that we need to see in our society. So thanks for sharing your insights. We have some other upcoming webinars that you all can continue to plug into. Carolina's going to share those in the chat. It's basically the same link that you use to register for this, for you to register for the other ones. And we also have a survey that is available for you all to provide additional insight. And we're going to provide some of that data out to everyone who participates in these workshops. So feel free to plug into that survey if you haven't already done so. And then we're going to share out a follow-up email after today with the recording link to this event and all the information that you need in order for you to start to execute hybrid meetings in your municipalities and with the institutions that you work with and serving the people that you are trying to serve. And one additional piece is we also support with procurement and buying IT hardware. So if you need any support with that, please reach out to Carolina. She's going to put her email in the chat, and you'll also find that email in the follow-up email that will come from us. So if you have any questions around procurement, reach out to us. Thank you so much for joining us, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.